The lockdown was supposed to be a pause, a moment, to breathe, to reflect. The world outside had come to a standstill, and for the first time in years, life felt quiet, too quiet. At first, I welcomed it. No hectic schedules, no endless errands, no rushing from one place to another. Just me, my thoughts, and the walls of our home. But as the days turned into weeks, the silence began to feel heavy, like a weight pressing down on my chest. Arav was stuck in India, unable to return because of the travel restrictions. We spoke every day, his voice a lifeline across the miles, but it wasn't the same. I missed his presence, his warmth, the way he could make me laugh even on the hardest days. The bed felt too big without him, the nights too long. And then there was Asher, my son, my sweet, curious boy, who had suddenly become a man. At 20, he was no longer the child I could cradle in my arms. He was tall, confident, and so much like his father in ways that both comforted and unnerved me. The two of us were alone in the house, navigating this strange new reality. At first, it was simple. We cooked together, watched movies, and talked about everything and nothing. But as the days dragged on, I began to notice things I hadn't before. The way Asher's laughter filled the room, the way his eyes lingered on me when he thought I wasn't looking. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there, and I couldn't help but wonder if he noticed the changes in me too, the way I fumbled with my words, sometimes the way I caught myself staring at him longer than I should. The house, once a sanctuary, began to feel like a cage. The walls seemed to close in, and the air grew thick with unspoken words and unacknowledged feelings. I told myself it was just the isolation, the loneliness playing tricks on my mind. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. There was a shift happening, something I couldn't quite name, but could feel in the quiet moments. When we sat together in silence, when our hands brushed accidentally, when the world outside felt so far away that it was easy to forget where the boundaries lay. Little did I know the quiet would soon give way to something I could never have anticipated. The lockdown wasn't just a pause, it was the beginning of a journey I never thought I'd take. And as I sit here now looking back, I realize that the walls of our home weren't just confining, they were a mirror reflecting parts of myself I had buried long ago. The question is, was I ready to face what I saw, or was I already too far gone to turn back? It started innocently enough, or at least that's what I told myself. The lockdown had stretched on for weeks, and the nights were the hardest. The silence was deafening, and the loneliness felt like a physical ache. Arav's absence was a constant reminder of how much I relied on him, not just as my husband, but as my anchor. Without him, I fell to drift like a boat lost at sea. And so I turned to the only thing that could distract me from the emptiness, my own thoughts, my own desires. One night, I thought I was alone. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels almost alive, like it's waiting for something to happen. I was in the living room, lost in my own world. The TV was on, but I wasn't really watching. My mind was elsewhere, wandering through memories and fantasies I hadn't allowed myself to explore in years. I didn't realize Asher was still awake. I didn't realize he was watching me. When I found out he'd seen me, I felt a mix of emotions I couldn't quite untangle. Shame, of course, was the first to surface. Shame that he had seen me in such a vulnerable moment. Shame that I had let my guard down. But beneath the shame was something else, something I couldn't name, something that made my heart race and my cheeks burn. It was the first time I saw him, not just as my son, but as a man. I replayed the moment in my mind over and over, trying to make sense of it. The way he had looked at me, the way his eyes had lingered just a little too long. Was it curiosity, understanding, or something more? I told myself it was nothing, that I was reading too much into it. But deep down, I knew there was a shift happening, a spark that had been ignited in the quiet of that night. The days that followed were filled with tension, though neither of us acknowledged it. We went about our routines as usual, cooking meals, cleaning the house, talking about trivial things. But there was an undercurrent of something unspoken, something that hung in the air between us, like a question neither of us dared to ask. I caught myself stealing glances at him when he wasn't looking, noticing things I hadn't before. The way his shoulders filled out his shirt, the way his voice had deepened over the years, the way he carried himself with a confidence that was both familiar and new. It was confusing, overwhelming, and yet there was a part of me that couldn't help but wonder. What if this was more than just a fleeting moment? What if this spark was the beginning of something neither of us could control? I didn't have the answers, and that scared me more than anything. But even as I tried to push the thoughts away, they lingered like a whisper in the back of my mind, growing louder with each passing day. That night, the night he saw me, was the first crack in the wall I had built around myself. And once it was there, I couldn't unsee it. I couldn't ignore it. It was the first spark, the first step into a world I never thought I'd enter. And as much as I tried to convince myself it was nothing, I knew deep down that everything had changed. After I hurt myself, Asher offered to help. It was a simple gesture, one born out of kindness and concern. At least that's what I told myself. My thigh and back were aching, and the doctor had recommended massage to ease the pain. I didn't think much of it when Asher volunteered. He was my son after all, and I trusted him completely. But as the days went on, those massage sessions became something more, something I wasn't prepared for. His hands were gentle, almost reverent, as they moved over my skin. He was careful at first, focusing on the areas that hurt the most. But as the tension in my muscles began to ease, I noticed something else, a different kind of tension, one that had nothing to do with pain. It was in the way his fingers lingered, just a little too long, the way his breath hitched when our eyes met. It was in the silence that stretched between us, heavy with words neither of us dared to say. I told myself it was innocent. He was just helping me after all. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. Every touch, every glance felt like a step closer to a line we shouldn't cross. And yet, I couldn't bring myself to stop him. There was a part of me, a part one didn't want to acknowledge, that craved the closeness, the intimacy. It had been so long since I'd felt that kind of connection, and in that moment, it didn't matter where it came from. The sessions became a ritual, something we both looked forward to in secret. I would lie on the bed, my heart racing, as I waited for him to begin, and he would sit beside me, his hands warm and steady, working their way down my back, my thighs, my legs. It was supposed to be about healing, but it felt like something else entirely. It felt like discovery, like exploration, like two people trying to find their way in the dark. I tried to rationalize it, to convince myself that it was just the isolation, the loneliness playing tricks on my mind. But the truth was, I couldn't ignore the way my body responded to his touch, the way my breath caught in my throat when his fingers brushed against my skin. It was wrong, I knew that. But in those moments, it didn't feel wrong. It felt inevitable, like we were being pulled toward something neither of us could control. And then there were the glances, those fleeting, stolen moments when our eyes would meet and the world would seem to stop. In those moments, it was as if we were speaking a language only we understood, one that didn't need words. There was a question in his eyes, one I wasn't ready to answer. But every day, every touch brought us closer to the edge, closer to the line we both knew we shouldn't cross. I told myself it would stop, that we would stop. But the truth was, I didn't want to. There was a part of me that wanted to see where this would lead, even if it scared me, even if it was wrong. And as much as I tried to deny it, I knew Asher felt the same way. The tension between us was undeniable, a spark that had been ignited and was slowly growing into a flame. And once it started, there was no turning back. One night, everything changed. It wasn't planned, at least not on my part, but looking back, I can see how the tension had been building, how the unspoken words between us had grown heavier with each passing day. It was late, the house quiet except for the soft hum of the TV. I was sitting on the couch, lost in my thoughts, when Asher walked in. He had that look in his eyes, the one I'd been trying to ignore, the one that made my heart race and my stomach twist with a mix of fear and something I couldn't name. He sat down beside me closer than usual, and for a moment neither of us spoke. The silence was thick, charged with all the things we hadn't said. And then he broke it. He confronted me with his feelings, his voice steady but trembling with emotion. He told me things I never thought I'd hear from him, things that made my chest tighten and my mind spin. He showed me stories, videos, and talked about topics I never imagined we'd discuss. It was raw, unfiltered, and so painfully honest that I couldn't look away. I was scared, terrified even. This was my son, the boy I'd raised, the child I'd held in my arms and promised to protect. And yet, as he spoke, I realized he was no longer just my son. He was a man, someone who understood me in ways I didn't expect. He saw through the walls I'd built, the masks I wore, and it was both exhilarating and terrifying. For the first time in years, I felt truly seen, truly understood, and that scared me more than anything. I wanted to stop him, to tell him this was wrong, that we couldn't go down this path. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, I listened, my heart pounding, as he laid bare his thoughts, his desires, his fears. He talked about the loneliness, the longing, the way he'd felt drawn to me in ways he couldn't explain. And as much as I wanted to deny it, I knew I felt it too. There was a connection between us, one that went beyond the roles we'd always played. It was messy, complicated, and so very human. I tried to rationalize it, to tell myself it was just the isolation, the stress of the lockdown, the absence of Arev. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. This wasn't just about loneliness or curiosity. It was about two people reaching for something real, something that defied the boundaries we'd always known. And as much as I wanted to pull away, I couldn't. There was a part of me that wanted to see where this would lead, even if it meant stepping into the unknown. That night, as I sat there listening to him, I felt the ground shift beneath me. The lines between right and wrong, mother and son, began to blur, and I wasn't sure where I stood anymore. He was no longer just the boy I'd raised. He was someone who saw me, truly saw me, in a way no one else ever had. And in that moment, I realized how lonely I'd been, how much I'd been craving that kind of connection. But with that realization came fear. Fear of what this meant, fear of what we were becoming, fear of the consequences. I knew this wasn't something we could take back, not once we crossed that line. And yet, as I looked into his eyes, I couldn't bring myself to walk away. There was a pull between us, something undeniable, something that felt bigger than both of us. And in that moment, I knew we were standing on the edge of something that would change us forever. That night, everything changed. The confession, the honesty, the raw vulnerability. It was a turning point, a moment I couldn't unsee or undo. And as much as I tried to tell myself it was wrong, there was a part of me that couldn't help but wonder, what if this was what we both needed? What if this was the beginning of something neither of us could have anticipated? The questions lingered unanswered as we sat there in the quiet, the weight of his words hanging between us like a promise or a warning. The moment we crossed that line, I knew there was no going back. It wasn't something we planned, not really. It was as if the tension between us had reached a breaking point, and there was no other way forward but through. That night, the air was heavy with unspoken words, with desires we'd both been trying to ignore. And then, in a moment of weakness, or maybe strength, we let go. We stopped pretending, stopped fighting the pull that had been drawing us together for weeks. It wasn't just physical, though that was part of it. It was emotional, raw, and so very real. His hands, his touch, his voice. They were familiar and yet entirely new. I had known him his entire life, but in that moment, it was as if I was seeing him for the first time. He wasn't just my son anymore. He was a man, someone who understood me in ways no one else ever had. And as much as I tried to tell myself it was wrong in that moment, it felt like the only thing that made sense. I remember the way his breath hitched when I finally gave in, the way his eyes searched mine for reassurance. I remember the warmth of his skin against mine, the way his hands trembled as they traced the curves of my body. It was messy, imperfect, and so painfully human. And for a moment, I let myself forget the world outside, the rules we were breaking, the consequences we would have to face. In that moment, it was just us two people reaching for something real, something that defied the boundaries we'd always known. But even as I lost myself in him, there was a part of me that couldn't fully let go. The guilt was there lurking in the back of my mind, a shadow I couldn't shake. It whispered to me, reminding me of who we were, of the roles we were supposed to play. And yet I pushed it aside, telling myself that this was what we both needed, that this was what we both wanted. For the first time in years, I felt alive, truly alive, and I wasn't ready to let that go. Afterward, we lay there in silence, the weight of what we'd done settling over us like a heavy blanket. I could feel his heartbeat against my chest, steady and strong. And for a moment, I let myself believe that everything would be okay. But then the doubts crept in, the questions I couldn't answer. What had we done? What did this mean? And how could we ever go back to the way things were before? The guilt lingered like a shadow. I couldn't escape. It followed me everywhere, coloring every thought, every touch, every glance. I told myself it was just the shock, the aftermath of crossing a line we'd never meant to cross. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. This wasn't just a moment of weakness. It was a choice, one that would change everything. And as much as I tried to convince myself that it was worth it, the guilt was always there, a constant reminder of what we'd done. I tried to rationalize it, to tell myself that we were just two people trying to find comfort in a world that felt so uncertain. But the truth was, I couldn't ignore the weight of what we'd done. It wasn't just about the physical act. It was about the emotional connection, the bond we'd formed that went beyond anything I'd ever experienced. And as much as I wanted to believe that we could move forward, I knew that the guilt would always be there, a shadow I couldn't shake. That night, we crossed a line, and there was no going back. It was a moment of truth, of vulnerability, of connection. And as much as I tried to tell myself it was wrong, in that moment, it felt like the only thing that made sense. But the guilt lingered, a constant reminder of the choices we'd made and the consequences we would have to face. And as I lay there listening to the sound of his breathing, I couldn't help but wonder, was it worth it? Or had we just made the biggest mistake of our lives? After that night, the world felt different. It wasn't just the way Asher looked at me, or the way I caught myself hesitating before speaking to him. It was the silence, the kind of silence that feels alive, like it's waiting for you to break it. We moved through the house like strangers, careful not to touch, careful not to linger too long in the same room. But even when we weren't together, I could feel him. His presence was everywhere, a constant reminder of what we'd done and what we'd become. I tried to convince myself that it was just a moment, a slip, something we could bury and forget. But the truth was, I couldn't forget. His touch lingered on my skin like a brand, and his words echoed in my mind over and over. I kept replaying that night, trying to understand how we'd gotten here. Was it the loneliness, the isolation, or was it something deeper, something that had been growing between us for years without me noticing? The guilt was there, of course. It was always there, a heavy knot in my chest that tightened every time I looked at him. But there was something else, too, something I didn't want to admit. A part of me felt alive in a way I hadn't in years. For the first time in so long, I felt seen, understood, desired. And that scared me more than anything. How could I feel this way? How could I want this? The questions gnawed at me, leaving me restless and unsure. Asher seemed different too. He was quieter, more thoughtful, as if he was carrying the weight of what we'd done just as much as I was. Sometimes I'd catch him watching me, his eyes filled with a mix of longing and uncertainty. It was as if he was waiting for me to say something, to give him some kind of sign, but I didn't know what to say. How do you put words to something like this? How do you explain the unexplainable? The days blurred together, each one feeling longer than the last. We fell into a routine, but it was hollow, like we were both playing roles we no longer believed in. I'd cook dinner, he'd clean up, and we'd sit in the living room pretending to watch TV, while the tension between us grew thicker and thicker. It was exhausting, this dance of avoidance and longing, but neither of us knew how to stop it. There were moments when I wanted to reach out to him to bridge the gap that had formed between us, but every time I tried, the words stuck in my throat. What could I say? That I was sorry, that I wasn't, that I wanted to do it again. The truth was, I didn't know what I wanted. All I knew was that I couldn't go back to the way things were before. That version of us was gone, and I wasn't sure what had taken its place. At night, I'd lie awake staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with thoughts I couldn't escape. Was this love? Was it desperation? Or was it something else entirely? Something I didn't have a name for, I didn't know. All I knew was that it was real, and it was messy, and it was changing me in ways I didn't fully understand. The hardest part was the silence, the way we both knew what had happened, but refused to talk about it. It was like living in a house full of ghosts, each one whispering the things we were too afraid to say. I wanted to believe that we could move past this, that we could find a way to live with what we'd done. But deep down, I knew that wasn't possible. We had crossed a line and there was no going back. The only question was, where do we go from here? That night changed everything. It changed the way I saw myself, the way I saw Asher, and the way I saw the world. And as much as I tried to pretend that it didn't happen, the truth was always there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for me to face it. The aftermath was messy, complicated, and so very real. And as I sat there, staring at the walls of our home, I couldn't help but wonder, what happens now? Where do we go from here? And how do we live with the weight of what we've done? Now, as I sit here, the weight of everything presses down on me like a storm cloud ready to burst. I wonder if Arav will ever find out. Will he see it in my eyes, hear it in my voice, or sense it in the way I move through the world now? And if he does, what then? Will he understand? Will he see the loneliness, the longing, the desperation that led me here? Or will it destroy everything we've built, the life, the love, the family we've worked so hard to create? I think about him often, my husband, the man I vowed to spend my life with. He's been my anchor, my partner, my safe harbor for so long. But in his absence, I drifted, and now I'm not sure if I can find my way back to him. The guilt is a constant companion, whispering in my ear, reminding me of the promises I've broken and the trust I've betrayed. And yet there's a part of me that wonders if he would have done the same in my place. Loneliness has a way of changing people, of blurring the lines between right and wrong until you can't tell where one ends and the other begins. This is my story, a story of love, longing, and the lines we sometimes cross. It's messy and complicated, just like life. It's about the choices we make when we're at our weakest and the consequences we have to live with long after the moment has passed. It's about the way desire can twist and turn until it becomes something unrecognizable, something we never thought we were capable of. And it's about the questions that linger unanswered long after the dust has settled. What would you do if you were in my shoes? Have you ever faced a moment where right and wrong blurred into something you couldn't define, a moment where the rules no longer applied, and all that was left was the raw, unfiltered truth of what you wanted? I think we all have, in one way or another. Maybe it wasn't this, maybe it wasn't so extreme, but we've all been there, standing at the edge of a decision that could change everything, wondering if we should take the leap or turn back. I didn't turn back. I leapt, and now I'm left to deal with the fallout. The questions haunt me day and night. Was it worth it? Was the connection, the intimacy, worth the guilt and the fear, or did I make a mistake that will cost me everything I don't know? I may never know. All I know is that I can't go back, and I'm not sure I want to. The truth is, I'm still trying to figure out what this means for me, for Asher, for Arev, for all of us. So I ask you, what would you do? How do you live with the choices you've made, the lines you've crossed? Do you forgive yourself? Or do you carry the guilt like a stone in your chest, letting it weigh you down until you can't breathe? Share your thoughts, because sometimes the hardest questions don't have easy answers. And maybe, just maybe, in sharing our stories, we can find a way to make sense of the messiness of life.